Tonight, a full breakdown of last night's presidential debate and the latest on the race, an update on the Native American protests in North Dakota, and the latest on the fight to retake Mosul from ISIS. This is Talking Points. Welcome to the October 20th edition of Talking Points. I'm your host, Alex Amico. We have plenty to break down tonight, so before we begin, here's a quick update on the forgotten stories of the week. Tensions ran high in the Philippines when police and leftist Sandugo protesters clashed in front of the U.S. Embassy on Wednesday. The protesters were rallying against militarization and American presence on the land of indigenous people. At least 3 were injured and taken to the hospital. Footage of a van attempting to run over protesters and the police physically abusing protesters has since gone viral. Vladimir Putin has extended the humanitarian pause in airstrikes against eastern Aleppo for an additional 24 hours. The UN humanitarian chief Jan Egeland hopes that more wounded and sick will be evacuated from the area by the deadline with the help of the World Health Organization and the Red Cross. Rebels, however, have rejected the truce, with reports of continuous clashes and fights throughout the city. The State Department released statistics reporting that about 60% of all 11,000 Syrian refugees who arrived in the United States are children. These child refugees are enrolling in some public schools around the country in areas like Texas, Connecticut, and Chicago. The percentage of children is larger than other age groups, as Syrians tend to have larger families. Agency workers say these children have faced academic challenges such as limited English and interrupted education. An American soldier has died due to injuries in northern Mosul in Iraq. The Central Command said that the injuries were caused by an improvised explosive device. He is the first service member to have died from the launch against the Islamic State in northern Mosul. The Central Command has not released any additional information. And when we get back, we'll bring in the panel to get a look at last night's debate and analyze the accusations. Don't go anywhere.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. God, no.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early.
You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back. Now, can we get back to politics? Last night's debate was the last chance for voters to see Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump together. The debate was more policy-focused, and moderator Chris Wallace kept both candidates in check. Clinton and Trump talked about a variety of new issues, from the Supreme Court to abortion. Here to talk about how the debate went and what's to come are Dan Prager and Paul Dwyer. Guys, thank you for joining me. So let's start with Donald Trump. He comes into this race trailing in most national polls, trailing in a lot of battleground states. He's underwater with women and minorities in particular. Did he make up any ground last night?
Not really. I mean, 2 of the major moments you see in this debate are when Trump called Clinton a nasty woman and when he said bad hombres to describe some of the immigrants coming into the country.
Yeah.
And neither of those are going to help him with immigrants, minorities, or women. So really, he didn't do anything. He shored up his base.
But he in the first couple minutes, the first question was about the Supreme Court, and Paul, that's probably his strongest argument to keep Republicans who are thinking of leaving with him, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of Republicans that's their single issue vote with Trump. For example, Ted Cruz, he was just never Trump, never Trump. Trump said there's stuff about his family, but he finally came around because the Supreme Court is so important to them. So for that to be the first topic of the entire debate, and something that hasn't been brought up, in past debates it was great for Trump, and he handled it pretty well.
And one issue that hadn't come up much was guns, and that came up with the Supreme Court when they talked about the D.C. versus Heller decision. Dan, it looks recently like Hillary might be competing in Arizona and Georgia, pretty conservative states with big gun cultures. Do you think her answer might have helped her or hurt her there?
It's tough to say because her answer was a bit of a weak one if you look at all the facts. Her answer on what D.C. versus Heller was doesn't really measure up to the facts. But at the same time, it was a good answer if you're looking at it from a standpoint where you don't really know what D.C. versus Heller did. So if you're thinking, oh, she was just trying to help children and make sure that children can't get their hands on guns, she's doing a good job. She's not against the Second Amendment. So she did well in that regard, but if you look a little more into it, it doesn't really add up.
Overall, though, I think Chris Wallace did a really outstanding job.
Absolutely.
I mean, the first few questions about how do you view the Constitution, how do you think it should be interpreted, they did end up going into some of the scandals later on in the debate, and I thought it was interesting. There was a back and forth about the Clinton Foundation, which has obviously been a big issue in this race with the pay-for-play allegations, and Clinton hit back by bringing up the Trump Foundation. Paul, do you think that was a winning strategy for her to bring that up, or how do you think that worked out for her?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a wash. She just throws in the fact that the Trump Foundation is not doing the work that the Clinton Foundation is, because the Clinton Foundation does do a lot of great work around the world. But at the same time, I mean, there are a lot of quid pro quo allegations and all of that surrounding it. So if she just throws it on, just dodges it with the Trump Foundation, I think it's a good strategy for her.
I would like to point out, Republican pollster Frank Luntz was surveying these undecided voters, and he did a survey of what was the strongest moment for Trump in the debate, and it was when he talked about Clinton's loss of $6 billion in the State Department, which has been debunked many times by fact checkers. But voters see that as something that a good talking point by Trump.
Right. Well, so probably the biggest takeaway from last night was this sort of idea of a rigged system, and Donald Trump hammered that pretty hard. So to talk about that, I want to bring in Galat Malamed. So Galat, what exactly is rigged? What is Trump saying is rigged?
Well, Trump is saying a few things are rigged. First, he's citing Pew Research saying that there are millions of people registered to vote who shouldn't be registered, including people who are dead. But the flaw in that is, yes, there may be people registered to vote who shouldn't be, but that doesn't mean that these people are voting because of voter ID laws, because widespread voter fraud is so difficult in this country because it's a decentralized system. Each state has their own way of conducting.
Trump's been beating the rigged election drum for the last week pretty strongly, and Chris Wallace asked him about it in the debate. Let's take a listen to his answer.
Do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time.
So Galat, guys, it's pretty impossible to overstate how big that is. A presidential candidate saying that he might not accept the election results. Now, in his defense, Republicans are defending it by pointing out that in Bush versus Gore, Al Gore did not accept the election results at the time. Does that defense hold water?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's like comparing apples and oranges. Bush versus Gore, Al Gore did not say weeks before the election, I will not accept the result. This came after the fact, after he won the popular vote, and Florida said they needed to do a recount because they were a 500 vote difference in Florida out of 6 million people.
Gore also never called into question the fact that the election, that we have free and fair elections, or that the media was against his side. He was just saying there might have been some mistakes. He only lost Florida by about 500 votes, so it's fair to say.
Right.
I think that is just the quickest spin that they could put on this, and I mean, I guess because just literally right after the debate, Kellyanne Conway was out there, and then all the surrogates last night in post-debate coverage were bringing up the Al Gore situation in Florida. So I think that's just like their play back because of what Trump did.
And then today, Trump actually doubled down on his claim that on his non-committal to accept the election results. Let's take a listen to that.
I would like to promise and pledge to all of my voters and supporters, and to all of the people of the United States, that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
Wow. So that's pretty remarkable right there.
Yes, this is, I mean, it undermines American democracy, saying he doesn't have trust in the system. he only has trust in the system if it favors him. And also this doesn't just affect him, it affects every single person on the ballot. Let's say he loses and doesn't accept it. Does that mean the people who won their congressional district, who won their state senator seat, that they didn't win either because the election is rigged?
And that statement kind of shows he's going past just partisanship or any claim of like the liberal media. It's going more into like, if Trump loses, then something's rigged. Clinton brought up yesterday that he said the Emmys were rigged when he lost, and although Trump made light of it, it's kind of interesting to see if he loses, he's not going to accept it, and that's dangerous.
So let's talk nuts and bolts here. Let's talk about the road to 270. Each candidate right now needs to find a path to win the 270 electoral votes. Has Trump lost paths? Is there any path for him to get there right now?
With Trump, you're looking at just 2 or 3 paths, and they're very little. Clinton has many paths. Trump, I mean, he's gonna have to win Florida, Ohio. And if he doesn't win Pennsylvania, he's basically going to have to win all of the other swing states and even a couple states right now that are leaning Democrat. So, but if he does win Pennsylvania and then he brings on Florida, he has a little bit of leeway with some other smaller vote states.
Florida's really the most important state.
Florida definitely is.
If Trump wins Pennsylvania and Ohio and North Carolina and New Hampshire and Nevada and Colorado and Iowa, he still doesn't get to 270 without Florida.
It's incredible. And really, the thing is, Florida, the perennial swing state, most pollsters have it leaning blue right now. Clinton's up at least 5 points in a lot of polls.
That's kind of bringing in the fact that some swing states are now leaning blue. Some red states are now leaning swing right now. Michelle Obama was in Arizona today. Is there a real chance of her flipping Arizona or Georgia?
I think so. I think right now, if the election were held right now, she'd take Arizona. And I think if the election were held right now, Evan McMullen or Clinton would probably take Utah over Trump.
I still think right now that Trump is going to win Utah. And Georgia is probably more leaning red. I don't think the demographics have changed enough yet, maybe in future cycles, but Arizona is definitely one that's in play.
Also, we don't yet know what's to come. We still have a few weeks, and nobody could have predicted that the video from Access Hollywood would come out. So we don't know. There could be something coming out that could take a state like Georgia that, should have been an easy red state, but is now just, like it's still red, but not as red as it should be, and it could completely change.
When's the last time we went a week without hearing a scandal from one of these two political candidates?
So in our final 30 seconds, though, Dan, I'm going to ask you, what's going to be your surprise of the election? On election night, what's going to be the result that we're shocked by?
McMullen wins Utah. Ooh. It's going to happen.
That would be the first time since George Wallace in 1968 that a third-party candidate won any electoral votes. That would be really quite something.
It'd be amazing.
All right, guys, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you for joining me. Coming up, Sarah Nevin will join us with an update on the North Dakota pipeline protests and the arrest of Democracy Now! Journalist Amy Goodman. We'll be right back.
Well, Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. Since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. God, no.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early.
You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back. This election cycle, 9 states have referendums on the ballot for the use of either medical or recreational marijuana. Currently, 25 states and D.C. have legalized medical marijuana, and 4 states allow the use of recreational marijuana. On a federal level, marijuana remains a Schedule I substance, which means the DEA considers it to have no medical benefit and high addiction potential. Public opinion, on the other hand, has moved in favor of legalization, with 57% of Americans believing marijuana should be legalized. That's up from 32% 10 years ago. Here with more on this year's referendums is Talking Points contributor Joey Lino. Joey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the classification of marijuana. Right now, it's a Schedule I drug by the DEA, which is the same classification as heroin, coke, and LSD. Why is that?
Well, the most recent attempt to reschedule marijuana was in the form of a petition to the DEA. and the DEA referred to the FDA, to the Food and Drug Administration, to look into this. And the FDA recommended that the DEA keep marijuana as a Schedule I substance. They cite a high potential for abuse, as you said, and a lack of medical benefit, citing multiple studies from over the years. They also acknowledge that it's not necessarily they all acknowledge that there are no real links to cancer and no links to mental illness, or that there's no real proven evidence that's a gateway drug. However, they say in order to reschedule it, there really needs to be more research done, which which paradoxically you aren't allowed to do if it's Schedule I. Yes.
So right now in the country, popularity of marijuana is pretty high, pun intended. But it's still legal in many states. There's all these state-by-state referendums, but what are the prospects for change at a federal level?
So if someone attempted to petition the DEA again, it would likely take a few years, and the result could very possibly end up the same way. For real change on the federal level, it's going to take an act of Congress. And right now, with public opinion swaying in favor of legalization, that's going to put pressure, as well as if states legalize it, specifically California. They're kind of been seen as a benchmarker on this issue for many years. And right now, their Prop 64 is currently hovering at about 60%.
But so standing in the way of all this, what are some of the concerns of the anti-legalization crowd? What are they worried is going to happen?
Well, many people are afraid of increased high driving and more youth rates. However, in Colorado and Washington, where they've had recreational marijuana since 2014, use rates haven't gone up, neither have traffic fatalities, and really most of the arguments against it just really don't hold a lot of water.
Joey Lino, thank you for joining us. More than 700 people from 200 indigenous nations are living in makeshift camps in North Dakota to protest the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Protests gained national attention this summer, and now on weekends, protest numbers can reach into the thousands. Among the protesters are celebrities, activists, and lawmakers. They're all fighting for the project to be dismantled, but construction of the pipeline officially resumed this month. Here to discuss the intensifying protests and law enforcement intervention is Talking Point's national correspondent Sarah Nevins. Sarah, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So there's been a recent spike in arrests at the pipeline protests. What's going on there?
Yeah, so most of the arrests have been made on the grounds of trespassing because the pipeline is being built on private property. So when the protesters are blocking construction vehicles or chaining themselves to bulldozers, they're intervening in private activity. So since September, over 100 people have been arrested, including 26 just this last Monday when construction got the go-ahead to resume. The most notable arrest, though, has been the arrest of Democracy Now! Journalist Amy Goodman, who was charged with engaging in a riot and criminal trespassing after filming a protest when protesters broke down a police fence and engaged in police force.
Right, and so they dropped the trespassing charge, but this has still been a very controversial arrest. Can you explain sort of why that is?
Right, so the North Dakota prosecutor basically said that filming was not an excuse for trespassing. And so because Amy trespassed, she was participating in the riot. So those charges have been thrown out, but she's not the only journalist who has been arrested. Just this week, documentarian D.S. Schlossberg was arrested for filming a demonstration, and she is now facing felony charges. And so Amy Goodman released a statement that basically sums up the concerns over these arrests, saying, "This is a complete vindication of my right as a journalist to cover the attacks on protesters and of the public's right to know what is happening with the Dakota Access Pipeline." So there's been a lot of argument that law enforcement is really silencing journalists and stopping them from covering this story.
So last time we talked about this, a federal judge had ruled that the pipeline construction be temporarily stopped. That ruling has since been overturned and construction resumed this past week. What are the chances of it being shut down permanently? Is there any chance that these protesters' demands will be met?
So it's really difficult. So there's two parts to that lawsuit. The first is that the Army Corps of Engineers who funds this project didn't properly consult the natives about the protection of historical sites. That's what got overturned. But the construction still is paused in certain places because the Justice Department is investigating if the agency properly consulted with the tribes about the environmental impact the pipeline could have on their land.
So there's been this mass movement of Native Americans. We just mentioned there's been tons of indigenous people, tons of different nations. What sort of impact can that have on this?
Yeah, so it's really opened up a huge door of a reassessment into longstanding policies of Native Americans just feeling like they're not being heard and they're not having influence on policy and projects that cross their land. And so in the last few weeks, federal agencies have set up consultations and committees with Native Americans in 6 regions around the country to really discuss how to handle future projects and make sure that the Native Americans their concerns are actually heard and also addressed in the planning process.
So we mentioned that some of these protesters have been lawmakers. What sort of reaction have we seen from the mainstream political world to these protests?
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders, along with 4 other senators, sent a letter to President Obama asking him to intervene after the court overruled their decision. So not a lot of senators are coming out in support of this. There's been a lot of backlash that neither Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton have come out saying, like, do you support what's going on here? So a lot of people have been silenced about it at the moment.
Sarah, thank you for joining us. After the break, the latest on the attempt to retake Mosul from ISIS. Stay tuned.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent. We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. In June of 2014, the Iraqi city of Mosul fell to a group of terrorists with the name ISIS. The Blitzkrieg takeover of the city and utter decimation of the Iraqi army thrust this terrorist group into the international eye. It's also the place where their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, proclaimed the start of his caliphate. Now, almost 2 years later, more than 18,000 Iraqi troops, with support from 10,000 Kurdish and 5,000 U.S. troops, are beginning the battle to take it back. And joining me to talk about this is Talking Points international correspondent Elijah Shama. Elijah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about recently Turkish-backed Syrian rebels. They retook the town of Dabiq, which people were saying was a big symbolic victory. Why was that?
It's really symbolic because Dabiq was the place where ISIS said that kind of this end of times battle against Western forces was going to go down. And they lost that town pretty decisively, pretty fast. ISIS has since backtracked on that claim and said this was just the start of the fight, in a way to kind of say that they're not really losing, it's just getting started.
So looking at Mosul, in this battle for control, I just mentioned there's ISIS, there's Kurdish troops, there's Iraqi troops, there's U.S. troops. There's a lot of different people involved. Who actually has control and who's fighting for this?
Right now, ISIS has control of the main city. We're seeing the Iraqi army kind of push in from the south with Kurdish forces pushing in from the north. What's really important, though, is that when Mosul is taken, it needs to be an Iraqi flag that flies over that city. Because when we look at this, if the Iraqi people don't have faith in the Iraqi government to take back a city, it can't be a Shia militia, it can't be a Sunni militia, it has to be Iraq.
And so there's been some problems with the Iraqi army in the past. Are they ready for the fight that lies ahead to retake this city?
Well, it's interesting. They've had massive coalition air support that's kind of helped them. They've been supported by F-16 fighters, A-10 attack planes, and they've really, really stepped up their game. What we saw them kind of crumpling and losing Mosul in a matter of days back in 2013, that's not happening now. They really want to retake the city, and they have more than enough firepower to do it.
And so for ISIS, this would be the latest in a string of territory losses for them. What does the future look like for them? How does losing territory affect them?
It's interesting because I think we're seeing the death of ISIS as a nation state. The caliphate is not going to be a thing in a couple of years. But ISIS is always the most dangerous when it's backed into a corner. And right now it is being backed into that corner. When we see this trend happening, we see when they lose territorially, they attack internationally. So what we're seeing is ISIS transitioning to more of an Al-Qaeda model, but also terrorism is going to step up as a result. If they can't win on the battlefield, they're going to try and win in people's homes.
Well, one of the big factions in fighting ISIS, one of the crucial factions, have been the Kurds. What do they get out of this fight?
It's interesting. The Kurds have declared autonomy in a large stretch of the region that stretches between Syria, northern Turkey, and Iraq. They're trying to fight so that they can kind of secure land for that state. It's interesting though because Iraq doesn't want to give them that land. So really, they're not really sure what they're getting out of this. They're kind of fighting with the intention of keeping that land, and Iraq doesn't want them to.
So the Kurds, they're the largest ethnic group in the world without its own state. They're pretty pro-US, pro-Western. They're a crucial ally in the fight, but they come at odds with Turkey, which is another U.S. ally. What sort of complication does this create in the Middle East?
I think after the dust settles, the Kurdish problem is going to be the biggest problem that we talk about in the Middle East, because these people desperately want their state, and the Kurdish Peshmerga is by far the best fighting force in the region right now. Their name literally translates to those who face death. These people know a fight, and they know how to fight, and they have enough U.S. hardware to be able to put up one. And Turkey has really been hammering them. Every time they said they've been going after ISIS, they've really been going after the Kurds.
I gotta say though, We Who Face Death is a pretty awesome name. Elijah, thank you for joining us.
No problem.
We will be right back.
Looking for these? You drive buzzed. It could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Finally tonight, for the last few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about the integrity of our elections. Some people have warned that widespread voter fraud could rig the result of the election. Now, it is true that there was a time in our history in the days of powerful urban and rural party bosses where the integrity of our elections was frequently compromised. One of the more notable cases was Lyndon Johnson's first Senate victory, where there is compelling evidence to suggest it was the result of widespread fraud in Texas counties near the Mexican border. Another case was in 1960 when Chicago Mayor Richard Daley was accused of padding the Chicago votes for President Kennedy with voters who were actually dead. My personal favorite was in the 1930s when Governor Huey Long was running for Senate in Louisiana. He asked one of his county bosses how many votes he could expect to go against him in his county. The boss said 2. On election day, there were no votes against Huey. He asked the boss what happened to the 2, and the boss said they changed their minds. Never mind the fact that Huey got 3,000 votes in a county of less than 2,000 people. But that was then, and this is now. Political parties as an organization simply are not as strong as they once were. They don't exert as much control over their voters or over the process itself as they once did. This past summer, I had the pleasure of reporting on voting issues, specifically in the Deep South. Part of the projects that the organization I worked with undertook was a comprehensive database of all proven cases of voter fraud in the United States since the year 2000, including all kinds of voter fraud, in-person, absentee, ballot stuffing, what have you. Our organization found 2,068 proven instances of voter fraud in the United States since 2000. So if we assume for the sake of argument that we're only talking about presidential elections, that works out to about 517 cases of fraud nationwide per presidential election. In 2012, over 129 million votes were cast for president. President Obama won the national popular vote by just under 5 million votes. No state was decided by fewer than 74,000 votes. You can decide for yourself whether 517 fraudulent votes across the country would have been enough to make a difference. That's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and don't forget to check out our webisodes and blog posts on CitrusTV.com. I'm Alex Amico. Good night, Syracuse.